Will Game of Thrones stick the landing for the final episode? After 8 years, 72 episodes, and all the incest you can get away with on premium cable, winter has finally come for Game of Thrones. Next Sunday, the final episode of George R.R. Martin's epic fantasy saga will air on HBO, and viewers in all 7 kingdoms are all wondering the same thing. Can the show possibly come to a satisfying conclusion? It's not going to be easy to do with a show with so much history and such a devoted fan base, and it seemingly got even harder on Sunday. This week's penultimate episode was a morally complex and often infuriating hour and a half of television that took plot threads in unexpected directions and sent beloved characters into some really dark places. So in other words, it felt like old school Game of Thrones. But it still left a lot of fans cold. Social media was overrun with complaints about the episode, but before we can discuss said complaints, we should warn you that the night is dark and full of spoilers. So if you haven't seen the episode and don't want to know what happened, this would be a good time to make like Gendry and disappear without explanation for a long period of time. Alright, so the big complaints about last night's episode include Dany's heel turn when she decides to use her dragon to test all the fire alarms in King's Landing, Jaime and Cersei's final scene that offered a weirdly tender farewell to Westeros' least favorite brother-sister incest duo, and Tyrion throwing poor Varys under the bus, or under the dragon, as it were. Now, things the fans aren't complaining about include the Clegane Bowl, because that thing was just as awesome as we had hoped, and well, pretty much nothing else. From top to bottom, this was a super divisive episode, which means delivering a satisfying conclusion is gonna take a lot of work. Is the show up to the task? Well, we would ask Bran to look into the future and tell us, but that guy has been pretty useless for a couple of seasons now. So instead, we'll just tell you what questions we still want to see answered in the final episode. So first, let's start with the big one. Who will sit on the Iron Throne? Assuming it still even exists. After Dany's siege on the Red Keep, that thing might just be a pile of broken swords by now, but the point still remains, who, if anyone, will end up ruling over Westeros? Dany's in power now, but after revealing herself to be a queen just as mad as her daddy, it would be pretty depressing to leave things that way. So, you know, still a possibility seeing as how this is Game of Thrones. But there are still plenty of other contenders in the mix. We could see anyone from Jon to Tyrion to Sansa taking the big promotion, or maybe nobody at all. Maybe the people of Westeros will finally get fed up with all of this feudal nonsense and adopt a constitutional democracy. Now they get to vote for the leader that will burn them all with fire. And speaking of Sansa, she's been pretty steadfast in her refusal to bend her knee to the Dragon Queen, and it seems unlikely that the stubborn Stark will change her tune now that Daenerys has become a bona fide war criminal. That's a conflict that's sure to come to a head in the last episode, or at least we really, really hope it does, with Sansa coming out on top. Of course, we want to see the Jon and Dany's auntie-nephew romance resolved, but it almost feels more important to give these two fierce leaders that final face-off that they deserve. After all the complaints about the show shortchanging their female characters this season, anything else would seem disappointing. And while we're on the topic of Starks, let's talk a little bit about Bran. Is this guy gonna do anything besides look wistfully off into the distance and speak in sub-Yoda riddle speak this season? We hope so. At one point it seemed like the show was setting him up as the mystical-minded savior of mankind, but he has done absolutely bupkis these last 5 episodes. Is the show gonna pay off all that setting him up as the three-eyed raven, or was his ultimate purpose in this story just to act as Night King shark bait?
I'm going to go now.
Go where?
Also, we know the Night King has come and gone, but that doesn't mean winter necessarily went along with him, right? Ned Stark's "winter is coming" quote from episode 1 has lingered over the series and an entire ecosystem of memes for 8 years now, and it wasn't just a warning about the Night King. Westeros goes through some long-ass 10-year winters every few generations or so, and they were known to kill off whatever populations didn't have the foresight to stock up on food and supplies for the long haul. Unfortunately, it looks like one of those winters is almost here, and instead of saving up their supplies, the Seven Kingdoms have been wasting them on fueling war after war after war. So, is winter still coming? And if it does, will it ultimately render the Game of Thrones pointless? Who cares about ruling when all of the people you rule have frozen to death? Of course, if Game of Thrones really wants to deliver a big FU to humanity, they could just ignore all of these questions, as well as hundreds of others, like will Tormund and Brienne ever end up together? Is there going to be a final payoff to Arya's brown eye, blue eye, green eye prophecy? Is Bronn ever going to get his castle? And so many more. Man, at this point, it seems like the only thing we can be sure of is Ramsay's warning from a few seasons ago. If you're expecting a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. But then again, maybe we're wrong. We hope we're wrong. Are we wrong? You tell us.
I hope I'm wrong.
You always do. Is there some way Game of Thrones could really come to an ending that will make us all happy? Are you happy so far with what you've seen? Let's discuss. Thanks for watching. Be sure to like, subscribe, and mash that little bell to get notified every time we go live with the show or drop a new video. And if this isn't enough Game of Thrones for you, make sure to check out our Game of Thrones after show, All Kings Considered, live Mondays at noon Pacific on Nerdist YouTube and Geek and Sundry's Twitch.